Good morning. It is my pleasure today to welcome everyone to the 2022 class of 1953 lectureship. To commemorate their 50th Darlington reunion, the school's class of 1953 chose to establish a legacy gift to the school which would broaden and enhance the education of the Darlington student. Members of the class established and endowed the Class of 53 Lectureship, which is an annual program that features speakers from all walks of life, career fields, and backgrounds. It is our great pleasure today to welcome John and Sylvia Hine. John is a life trustee and a member of the Class of 1953 and has been one of the key contributors and drivers of the Lectureship Series. Let's give the Hines a warm welcome and a round of applause, please. We're also grateful for the presence of members of our legal community and law enforcement services and appreciate all that they do in our local area as well. One of the best parts of having speakers on campus is the ability for their friends to introduce them. And so by this time, it is my pleasure to ask Vicki Vincent, Director of Alumni Relations, to introduce today's speaker.
Thank you, Mr. Bell. It is my pleasure to introduce our 18th Class of 1953 Lectureship Series speaker this morning. It's an extra special honor for me because Justice LaGrua and I have known each other since our student days at the University of Georgia, where she and I were sorority sisters. She was an amazing student leader then, and she has made us all proud throughout her very distinguished career. It's only fitting that she is here on the last day of International Women's Month. As you can see in the program, Justice LaGrua has dedicated her life to the service of the people of Georgia and to the law. When I reached out to her about coming to speak at Darlington, and despite her busy schedule, she didn't hesitate to accept this opportunity to share about her work with the program that she is so very passionate about. The My Journey Matters program Justice LaGrua initiated while serving in Fulton County. She presided over this pilot probation program that is designed to help young offenders move away from a lifetime of incarceration by offering them a way back into the community using close supervision, substance abuse counseling, job training, and advancing education. I can't wait to hear more about it. So without further ado, please welcome Justice LaGrua to Darlington.
Good morning. Can everybody hear me okay? Y'all are good? Great. Thank y'all so much for having me here, Vicki, for that introduction, and everybody's been so warm and gracious to me. Before I tell you a little bit about the program, I want to tell you a teeny bit about my background because it plays into where I got to My Journey Matters. I'm an Army brat. So that's not a bad term when you're the daughter or son of a military person. My dad served 30 years in the United States Army, which meant I don't have a hometown. I guess my hometown's where my dad was from in Connecticut, but we moved every 12 to 18 months. I don't know that it's either one. Unlike many of you, I don't have childhood friends that I kept up with because, and this is dating myself, but y'all can laugh, we didn't have Twitter and Instagram and email and all of those things. We had to write letters longhand. And I understand we don't even do longhand anymore. So when you move around that much, I guess the flip side of that was, though, I got to travel all around this country and around the world. When I was 12, one of my little girlfriends, whose father was also in the military, was an exchange student with the Venezuelan government. So I spent 6 weeks in Caracas when I was 12 years old in the summer. I went to high school in Germany and got to see Germany, France, Spain, Austria, and got to see Berlin. both east and west, and this would be dating myself again, but before the wall came down. And I tell you all that to tell you this. I grew up loving government and loving this country. And unfortunately, and Vicki shared a story last night that I won't repeat verbatim, but unfortunately, we sometimes forget how lucky we are. We may not be a perfect government here in the United States, but in my personal opinion, it's the best one we have. We have the right to have our disputes settled by a jury in an open court, not by a dictator, not behind closed doors. We have the right to vote for our government, and I'll put in one quip here. You're not allowed, in my opinion, to gripe about the government if you don't vote for it. You get to have your say in who serves in our government. We get to say whatever we want publicly, good or bad, about our government, and that doesn't happen around the world. So we have a lot of problems and faults in our country, but I still think it's the best one in the world. So after I came back from Germany, I was supposed to go to Duke to go to college, but I didn't get in until January. So I didn't want to stay home for that first semester, but I wanted to go where it was warm. University of Georgia, here I came. And for those of you who haven't been to Athens, I had never been to the University of Georgia. And when my mother brought us down here in the Volkswagen green bus and drove through the agricultural fields, I was crying. I thought, what have I done? Fast forward, I never left UGA, much to my father's chagrin, to go to Duke or UVA, and then went to Georgia State Law School and had just a phenomenal time, not in law school, but in my internships and externships at the law school. And my third year, ladies, you'll appreciate this, we have two prosecutors up here in the front row. My third year, I was interning in the Fulton County District Attorney's Office. And because my parents at the time lived in Virginia, I didn't go home at Thanksgiving break. I waited till Christmas because it was so close in time. And so I'm in my internship. I was going to spend Thanksgiving with the guy I was dating and his family that Wednesday and Thursday. And the attorney I was interning with came in, and there had been a serial killer on the loose in Atlanta, had killed 6 different men. And the attorney I was working for came in, and he goes, "We've got a search warrant and arrest warrant for this guy that's been terrorizing the city. Do you want to go?" And I was like, picked up the phone, called the guy I was dating and said, "Sorry, I don't know when I'm going to be home. I'll talk to you later. Goodbye." And that was the end of that conversation, and out the door I went. That ended up being a federal death penalty case that I got to work on as a student, and immediately went into prosecution when I left the Fulton County DA's internship, and was a prosecutor for most of the rest of my career before I became a judge. A couple of wrinkles, we may talk about them, we may not. But so I was a prosecutor, and how many of y'all know the difference between a felony and a misdemeanor? Okay, not many. I'll tell you real quickly just so you get a feel for what I did. Misdemeanors are those crimes that carry 12 months or less potentially in custody, and are things like criminal trespass, disorderly conduct, possession of marijuana less than an ounce, DUI, simple battery, simple assault. Those are prosecuted in big counties by the Solicitor General, who's like the district attorney of misdemeanors. And then felony cases, and those are cases that carry a year or more potentially in custody, up to and including the death penalty and life, are things like murder, rape, armed robbery, burglary, theft, child molestation. Those are felonies, and I was always lucky enough to be a felony prosecutor. So those are the kinds of cases I prosecuted my whole career. And that leads me to the beginning of the My Journey Matters stories. When I became a prosecutor many years ago, the average age of the violent offender, and when I say violent offender, I mean armed robbery, serious aggravated assaults, nighttime residential burglaries, i.e. when people are at home and people are breaking in, trafficking in drugs. When I started prosecuting, the average age of the violent offender was probably 19, 20, 21 years old, dropping out of high school in the 11th grade. Fast forward through my career, I had the opportunity about 12 years ago to become a judge on the Fulton County bench, where we did felonies in my role. And all of a sudden, I realized that the average age of the offender of violent offenses was somewhere between 14 and 19, dropping out of high school in the 9th grade. Now remember, let me back up. So for those of you that don't know, in Georgia, if you're charged and convicted or plead guilty to armed robbery, that's a minimum mandatory 10-year sentence. And that's a whole 10 years. There's no good time, there's no credit, and the judge has absolutely no control over that sentence. I can go up. I can go all the way up to life, but I can't go down. I can't go under 10 years. Now remember, back up, I was a prosecutor. Okay, so what, right? Now if Miss Sylvie here, sitting in the front row, leaves, they stick around on campus for the day, have dinner somewhere, and she goes out to her car and gets robbed at gunpoint and hit, and her purse stolen. Is 10 years a proper sentence? Sure. No argument. I will not make an argument that that is not an appropriate sentence for that crime. Probably is. Here's the problem and the question that I ask, and this is where the sheriff's going to get worried. What happens when this 16-year-old is arrested that robbed Miss Sylvie here? He's going to prison for at least 10 years. He's going to get out of prison. So he gets out when he's 26. He has no education. Remember, he dropped out of high school in the 9th grade, and whether he really has a 9th grade education is up for grabs. He has no education. He has no job skills. He's been raised in prison. And when he gets out, he's going to commit another crime. And there is going to be another victim. And unless he kills someone after he goes to prison, he's going to get out again. And there's going to be yet a third victim, or fourth, or fifth. And I'm not going to get into the nuances of recidivist sentencing and those things. That's a whole different thing. But until he gets probably to his 40s or 50s, he's going to continue to commit serious crimes. And I thought, so what are we doing? I had worked in, as I said, a number of district attorneys' offices, and worked with drug court, mental health court, veterans court. And I thought, is there something we can do that's similar if we identify these youthful violent offenders that we think maybe we can make a difference with? So we scoured the country for another program. I talk about myself, I'm a thief. There was no reason for me to recreate the wheel if I could steal a program from someone else. Couldn't find one. There was not one to be found. I think I had every intern for 2 or 3 years searching and researching. So we started on our own. And My Journey Matters was actually named by the participants in the program we had. And we would identify, and over the course of 10 plus years, there were changes and adaptations to the program. But we started a program where we identified these youthful offenders that we thought we might have an opportunity to help and change. So if you get into the My Journey Matters program, and originally it was on a sentence, and it became sort of something we did when somebody got bond, and the defense bar actually loved the program. They would ask, can you put my client in the program on bond? And we realized that was a good thing because we could see how somebody did before the district attorney was willing to reduce that armed robbery to a robbery, so I would have some discretion in sentencing. So let me tell you how the program works, and then I'll tell you some funny stories because y'all are getting bored. To be in the program, first we have to identify you, but then you have to come to court every month. And everybody pre-COVID came on the same day, the first Friday of the month. So you had to come, and you had to come see me the first Friday of every month. You had to be in school. You had to be drug tested routinely. You had a curfew. You had to bring me your report cards, progress reports. You had to read for a certain amount of time, 15 to 30 minutes every day, in addition to your schoolwork. And you had to write one-page handwritten book reports. And y'all are going, handwritten what? We don't handwrite anything. Well, with this group of young people, if you didn't make it handwritten, you knew that they were going to go on the internet, cut and paste, and bring you the report. And we always would tell them, I know when this is not your book report. And I'll tell you some of those stories in a minute because they're entertaining. You didn't get out of the program, period. Even if you got off bond and entered a plea, you stayed in the program. You didn't get out of the program until you had an education. So an education was a GED or a high school diploma, and higher education. Higher education in this context was not what y'all are thinking about, because a lot of these folks did not have the foundation, even with a GED or a high school diploma, to go to many of the colleges that y'all are likely going to be attending, especially you seniors here in the front part of the chapel here. So you could get a skill, HVAC, plumbing, welding, something where you could make a living. So you don't get out of the program until you're educated, high school diploma or GED, and a skill or higher education, drug-free for at least a year, and stable, employed. And it has been working. In the criminal justice world, recidivism, that is repeat offenders, are usually defined as folks that commit crimes within 3 years of being convicted. That's not what My Journey Matters is about. My Journey Matters is about not coming back to the criminal justice system, period. And so we've been fairly successful, and the social workers that worked on the program and the public defenders tell me they think it's more successful than the other accountability courts that we've had. So let me tell you some funny stories, then I'll tell you about some of the pitfalls, and then maybe take some questions. So I told you about the book reports, right? And I always knew if they weren't written by the students and they were copied. So one day we get the book report and I read it, and I realized immediately that that participant had not written it, because there were 3 words in the book report that gave me that clue. And the first one, I'm not sure y'all are gonna know, but my folks up front here are gonna know. The first word in the book report that gave me a clue was porter, the old luggage carrier at the hotel. They used to call those porters. They now call them, I guess, valets, or, but that was the word in the book report. The second one was brothel. Now, had it been strip club or some other words I won't use since we're streaming this, I might have believed it, but I did not believe for a minute that this young man knew what the word brothel meant. The third was persecution. So the next month he had to use the words, define them, and use them in a sentence. And he did really well with porter. He did well with brothel. And he got persecution okay definitionally and used it in a sentence, but it was clear he did not get the overreaching concept of persecution. And this is where y'all should feel very lucky. I had a courtroom full of about 80 people, participants in the program, and I asked who could tell me what the Holocaust was. Not a single person in the entire courtroom could tell me what the Holocaust was. Y'all are getting a phenomenal education, and you should be grateful for it, because a lot of your counterparts that don't have this opportunity are not. So we talked about that. We have had challenges. I always get asked, when I get asked about the program, why aren't other people doing this if it works? There's a couple of reasons. One, we're working on statistics. The program has had no funding. It was my staff and the public defender's office. That was it that supported this program for 11 years. But the bigger challenge, I think, for other judges to do this is it's risky. Judges are elected in Georgia, so you have to run for election, and that makes you a target depending on who wants your job and why they want your job. And you take all these, I'm telling you, all these great things about this program, right? But you've always got somebody that messes up, and they can mess up big. I've had at least 2 of my defendants that were in the program commit murders and be prosecuted for murder after being in the program. And I had one, and then I had another that just committed a whole bunch of crimes, and it was the Sunday front page story on the AJC. And it was my fault because I was the one that gave him the opportunity. And I'll tell you a story about two young men, Yancey Axum and Albert Hambrick, many years ago carjacked a young woman at Atlantic Station in Atlanta. Real carjacking, gun, the whole bit. They appeared in front of me. Albert was a little bit older than Yancey. Yancey, I think, was 15 at the time. He looked like he was 12. Yancey got in the program initially without having to do prison time. Albert Hambrick, because of some other things, had to go to prison for a couple years and be put in the program after. I got a probation revocation, that is, you messed up your probation, on the younger one, Yancey Axum, and he had committed 3 more home invasions at gunpoint. And we're having the hearing, and this woman from DeKalb County, she was a nurse, she's testifying. She had come home at 3 o'clock in the morning, popped her garage, Mr. Axum goes under, robs her at gunpoint, said she couldn't go home until he was caught, she couldn't sleep, and some judge gave him probation for the same thing. So we finished, obviously that judge was me. We finished the hearing. I sentenced Mr. Axum to 40 years in custody, in prison, and I looked at the victim in the case and I said, ma'am, I'm sorry, the judge you were referring to was me. We were trying to do something good. That was the sad part of that story. The great part of that story is Albert Hambrick, after serving 2 years in custody, showed back up in court within a week of being released and was employed in school. We got him a job with the city of Atlanta. He was promoted repeatedly. This is 5 or 6 years ago, got one of our first scholarships and has never been in trouble again. And then he's bought his first house. He's raising his family, and we stay in touch regularly. So those are some of the wrinkles. We did a lot of things. I would take the folks to the Capitol every year during the legislative season, and it was always entertaining to hear their stories when we went over. And these are folks that live within a couple of miles of the Capitol and have never been in the Capitol. And I'll tell you 2 stories about that, and maybe then take some questions, though I promised Vicki I'll tell you a little bit about networking and the importance of it. We went to the Capitol, and one of the times we went, we're sitting there, and it was during one of the presidential elections, and I don't think it had been narrowed down to Hillary Clinton and Trump at the time. I forget what it was, but I asked this group when we were in the Capitol, I said, who do you think the next president should be? This young man said, I think it should be Hillary. And I said, okay, why? And he said, because she'd be the first female president. And I said, okay. I said, but how about a policy reason that you think she'd be good? And he said, because she believes in giving people lots of stuff, and it's free. And this program has been as educational for me, I think, as the participants. I looked around the room and I said, and I had a young man, Mr. Gooden, who had just gotten a promotion on his job, and occasionally we had some outliers in the program. The program was designed for ages 14 to 27, but sometimes if we had folks that needed a little bit more support, we'd keep them in. And I had a couple that had been in and out of the criminal justice system for decades, and they ended up in the program. And this gentleman had had his first job at age 50, first full-time job at age 50. And his wife was with us that morning at the Capitol, and she had told me he had just gotten a raise. So I look around and I said, y'all understand, don't you, that free isn't really free. It means Mr. Gooden, who had just gotten a promotion, said that means you get less money. The more things we give, the less you make. And he looked at me like I was crazy. He's like, what are you talking about? And then I looked at Miss Clinkscales, the woman whose husband had just been promoted, and I said, and that means your husband's bringing home less money. And I realized that we weren't teaching basic things sometimes. And so we had a great discussion about it. I said, I think we can all agree that we need to support our veterans, our mentally ill, our disabled, folks down on their luck for a period of time. And they all agreed. And I said, but do you think your work money should be paying for the drug dealer? No. So I learned a lot that day too. So we went across the street to the Capitol, and this was when Brian Kemp, the current governor, was still the Secretary of State. And he was gracious enough, I had worked for him, to speak to these young folks. And we're in there talking to him, and one of the young men looks at the Secretary of State and says, can I ask you a question? And I thought, oh no, I don't know what's coming next, but, and then Secretary of State Kemp said, sure, go ahead. And he goes, are you a Republican or a Democrat? And Brian said, well, I'm a Republican, but here in this building, under the Gold Dome, we all work together, Republicans and Democrats, to try and do the best things we can for the people of Georgia. Question number 2, then why are you wearing a blue tie? So there was a lot of entertainment throughout this program. There was also, they don't lie, and they learn not to lie to me. And to be honest, when they first start with me, they look at me as the old white lady. But over time, they got to know me, and believe it or not, I think of them as sometimes my, not children, but grown-up kids, and they come running to tell me what goes on in their lives. So let me back up, and then I'll take some questions if y'all want. I want to tell you a little bit about life and networking, if you don't mind, because nobody ever told me. You never know where you're going to see the people you're sitting next to here, or the people you meet in your first job or your second job or your third job. And it becomes important. Well into my career, there was going to be a new district attorney, and I needed a job. So I thought I would apply to be the Solicitor General, the misdemeanor prosecutor. And I was walking my neighborhood one day with my dog, my golden retriever, Sneakers, and I ran into a guy I didn't know. He was a neighbor, and we just started chatting. And lo and behold, he was the governor's legal counsel. The governor was going to make the appointment to be solicitor. Was at my orthopedic doctor. We were talking, his son needed an internship, is at Jones Day now in Houston, I believe. And we were talking, and he ended up interning with me. I was telling him what I was doing, and he said, well, my wife was roommates with Governor Perdue's wife. During that same time, my investigator in the DA's office, because he was going to go with me if we got to go to the solicitor's office and be the chief investigator, says, Shawn, I went to high school with Senator Johnny Isakson's son. Do you want us to see if we can get an appointment with him and see if he'll support you? And I said, great. And so this gets set up, and Senator Isaacson was a very gracious man. But the young man who was a young staffer at the time that set us up with this appointment was a gentleman by the name of Chris Carr. For those of you who don't know, which is okay, Chris Carr is Georgia's now Attorney General. We became friends. When I went for my interview to become Solicitor General, I did not interview with the governor. I interviewed with a young gentleman who was his second legal counsel by the name of Harold Melton. Harold Melton just stepped down this summer as the Chief Justice of the Georgia Supreme Court. Right before I became a judge and decided I was going to apply for that, I was at the Secretary of State's office working over investigations. I did elections investigations and all kinds of stuff. And so I had to appear in front of the state election board regularly. On the state election board, this is a mixed bag, on the state of election board was Randy Evans, who just stepped down as Ambassador to Luxembourg, a presidential appointment, and Tex MacGyver, which was in the news a lot for murdering his wife, so that didn't help so much today. But I tell you all this because you just don't know where you're going to see people in your life. I had a young woman. I speak at Georgia State College of Law regularly, and I spoke at orientation this year. And I've spoken again because one of my term clerks was a Georgia State student, so he set me up there to speak a bunch of times. And in fact, when I needed a term clerk, I called a friend of mine that was an adjunct at Georgia State, and he recommended my current term clerk. That's how he got the job, by impressing his professor. There was a young woman, apparently, that was in a couple of the sessions I spoke to at Georgia State. I was having lunch one day over the holidays down by the courthouse, and she had a dog with her. And I stopped to say hello to the dog, and she looks at me and she says, "Are you a judge?" Or she said, "Aren't you a judge?" And I said, "Yes." She introduced herself to me as a first-year law student at Georgia State. We chatted. She asked, could she come speak to me sometime about her career and what she wanted to do, and I said, of course. And I spoke to her recently, and she was looking for an internship, and while she was in my office for less than 40 minutes, I texted one of my colleagues on the Fulton County bench, and she got an internship. Just because she took the time to stop and say hello. So don't be hesitant to meet people, to say hello, to introduce yourself, to find a mentor, to ask for help, because it really makes a difference over time, the people you meet. One of the prosecutors I worked for many years, her daughter is now one of my staff attorneys. So I've babbled quite a bit this morning, and I could tell you all kinds of more stories about My Journey Matters. But can I answer some questions for y'all about anything, about my career, about the law, about the courts, about the program, anything y'all are interested in? And somebody needs to ask a question, otherwise I'll call on someone. No questions? Yes, sir. And I'll repeat the question. What are the types of cases the Georgia Supreme Court tends to hear? About 85% of our cases are murder appeals, because the Supreme Court has what we call original jurisdiction. We have the only jurisdiction over the appeal of a murder case. It comes straight to the Supreme Court. We also have grants of certiorari, they call, or certs. Those are legal questions that come to us that we decide are so important that we need to take them up and answer them. We also handle all constitutional challenges, a challenge to the Georgia or the U.S. Constitution. But we get to decide whether it really is a constitutional issue or whether a lawyer has tried to make it into a constitutional issue to get to the Supreme Court. We also handle habeas corpus appeals, and habeas is, the easiest way for me to describe that is, it's the last appeal after all the other appeals. It's one more appeal of a conviction. We also handle what we call disciplinary matters. So those are matters of lawyer and judicial discipline. And those are pretty much, so we handle we have about 80 cases on our bench meeting every other week that we call bank, and then we have oral arguments once a month, as well as a number of other administrative responsibilities. So, yes, ma'am. Yes. The question was, I know you're appointed, do you serve a term, do you have to get reelected? And the answer to all of that is yes. So the way things work in Georgia is, if there's an open seat, either the legislature creates a new judicial position or somebody steps down or is removed in the middle of a term, then the governor gets to make an appointment. Once you get appointed, if you're fortunate to get appointed by the governor, you have to run at the next general election. So you get one appointment, and then you have to run after that for as long as you want to keep the position. At the county or state court level, judges are elected for 4 years, and at the appellate level, they're elected for 6. So now, also positions come open for election. So if in 6 years, I decide not to qualify to run. I decide I'm going to serve out my term, but not go to a next term, and I don't give it to the governor to appoint, then it will be what we call an open seat where anybody that's qualified can qualify and run for that seat. So that's how it works. It's a little bit unusual. A lot of states for judges have what they call retention, and the legislature will vote on whether a judge is doing a good enough job to keep their job. But in Georgia, judges are elected, though it is nonpartisan, unlike sheriffs, DAs, and solicitors, which are all partisan races. Other questions? Y'all are a quiet group. Yes, sir.
LaGrua, you had the unique distinction of serving as the chair of the Supreme Court's COVID-19 task force. Could you tell the students what all that entailed and the responsibilities that came with that?
Sure. The question was, I chaired the Chief Justice's COVID task force, and what were the responsibilities and how did that work? I am still serving as the chair of the task force, which is still in place. I got the phone call, I guess it was end of April or early May of 2020, said, would you chair the Chief Justice's COVID task force? And I thought, number one, you don't say no to the Chief Justice. So of course I said yes, and I thought, okay, it's another committee. I was on all kinds of committees. But for about 8 months, it was pretty much a full-time job, and it is ongoing. The COVID task force was comprised of members of all classes of courts, so the appellate court, superior court, state court, magistrate, probate, juvenile, all are represented, as well as attorneys from every sort of area of law. So you have plaintiffs' attorneys on the civil side and defense attorneys on the civil side, prosecutors, defense attorneys, family lawyers. And the whole purpose of the task force was to keep the criminal justice system and the court system moving during the COVID crisis. So we had to figure out a way how to keep the courts accessible and open to the public. And for those of you who have a real bad impression of lawyers, which is not always wrong, this was the most collegiate group of lawyers I've ever seen. These were folks on two sides of the aisle, all working together to make sure that we continued to be able to function. And I expect that the task force will remain in place, even if it's at some point is not the COVID task force. It may be the attorney task force or some other group to continue the conversations that we've had over the last number of years. Yes, sir. Have I ever accused somebody of being guilty, but they really weren't? I don't think so. Now, let me caveat that just a little bit. As a prosecutor, you have all these cases, and most criminal cases are resolved through a plea bargain. So the prosecutor and the defense attorney talk, and they agree that this is the right sentence for the crime, and as long as the judge agrees with that, that's the sentence. So can I tell you for certain that nobody I ever took a plea from was not guilty? No. Because in those kinds of cases, you don't always do a deep dive into the investigation of the case. But in terms of the cases I tried as a prosecutor, I never tried a case in my entire career that I did not believe the defendant was guilty. And I'll tell you something about our jury system that's kind of interesting, because it's been 20 plus years for me. In all those years, and I tried well over 100 felony trials as a prosecutor, mostly murder, rape, armed robbery, and as many as a judge. I can count on one hand the number of verdicts that I've seen where I thought, was I in the same courtroom? Did I hear the same facts? It's amazing. We throw 12 people that have never met each other into a jury room and tell them to sort it out, and they have to agree unanimously. Criminal verdicts all have to be unanimous, and it's amazing what they do. I will tell you a funny story about that. There was a case, and I wasn't the prosecutor, but I watched the case. A woman had come, a deputy sheriff had come home, and her boyfriend, she found out he was messing around, and she shot him. And she claimed it was an accident. okay? She claimed it was an accident. Now, the interesting thing, how many of y'all know anything about firearms? Any of y'all? All right, you know, how many of you know the difference between a revolver and a semi-automatic? All right, a revolver has the cylinder that you put the bullets in. Semi-automatic has the magazine that goes in the bottom. And a semi-automatic, when you fire it, it ejects the shell casing from the firearm. Well, in this case, it was a revolver. It was a .38, which is a caliber of bullet. And it carried an 8-pound trigger pull. That's a gallon of milk. So it takes the strength of holding a gallon of milk to pull the trigger on this revolver. And she said it was an accident. The point to the story for you is, so the jury is back there, and there's apparently a college-educated meteorologist on the jury, and they're arguing over whether or not this could be an accident. And the meteorologist said, well, maybe an alien did it. And they reduced the charges. Not sure what to tell you about that one. There was another murder case in Fulton County. Again, it wasn't mine, but I was familiar with it. And the jury sent a question out and said, is there any more evidence you haven't given us that we can have? So juries asked some funny questions. Yes, sir, I saw a hand. Did Will Smith commit a crime when he hit Chris Rock? If I take off my judicial hat and put on my prosecutor hat, I would say there's easily a chargeable crime. Whether he committed a crime is not for me or the prosecutor or the defense attorney to say. That's for a jury to say. Do I think if someone chose to charge him with a crime, could he be charged with a crime? Yes, absolutely. The reality is of that, and this is very typical in domestic violence cases, is do you have a witness that's willing to testify about the act that occurred and the crime that occurred? Now, this one's a little different. It's on video, so that changes the dynamics a little bit. But one of the big challenges with domestic violence cases is the victims often recant and say they don't want to testify. And that can be very difficult for a prosecutor to get that case taken care of. So we'll see what the academy and the rest of the folks do with that. Yes, sir. I'm sorry? Have I ever committed a crime? Not where the statute of limitations has not run. So thank you all so much for having me here today.
Thank you so very much, Justice LaGrua. We really appreciate your being with us today and are grateful for your remarks. This class of 1953 lectureship has become an important part of our students' education here at Darlington. And once again, we are deeply grateful to John Hine and the members of the class of 1953 for establishing this lecture series and for bringing us such a wonderful array of speakers through the past 19 years. This series has brought us a world-famous television journalist, a television comedian and entertainer, an art historian, a sports editor, a successful business entrepreneur, a Medal of Honor recipient, a specialist on energy and the environment, 2 generals, a publisher, a newspaper and television owner, a college president, a musician, an artist, a rocket scientist, an Olympic gold medal winner, a corporate CEO, a former member of Congress, and now a justice of the Georgia Supreme Court. All of these speakers have engaged and challenged our students in ways that have added immeasurably to their Darlington education. Justice LaGrua's name will be added to the list of lectureship speakers on the plaque, which hangs in Wilcox Hall just outside the head of school's office, to remind us of these great occasions provided by the class of '53. And now, on behalf of everyone at Darlington, Vicki Vincent, Darlington Director of Alumni Relations, will present Justice LaGrua with a very small token of our appreciation.
He's actually going to get that token after that.
Good. And finally, a reminder to any members of the class of '53 who might be with us to please come to the front of the chapel for a photo with Justice LaGrua. Thank you all for your attention today, and seniors, please lead us out.